Hey there! So let's now learn how to read documents with Mongoose in order to implement or getTour and getAllTours route handlers. And starting with the getAllTours handler. So first off, let's delete this piece of code here. And now what we're going to do in order to get all the tours from the database is to use tour, so the model again, and then on there we use the find method. Alright, so remember from the MongoDB intro section where when we wanted to query for all the documents, we simply used find. Okay, and so here it's the exact same method. And again, when we don't pass anything into it, so just like we're doing here, then it will return all the documents in that collection. Okay, so in this case, in the tour collection, obviously. Now, just like before, this is going to return a promise that we will await. And since we want to await, we need to make this an async function. So async, then here we can await and save the result into tours. All right, and that's actually it. So let's get rid of these comments here. We also don't want the requested add property. So that was just for testing before. And so, yeah, I think that's it. So this is how we get all the tours from the tour collection. So using find, then awaiting that result, and then sending it down here. So remember that we have this data property here to basically envelope the tours. And then we also send this property here, which simply measures the number of results that are in the tours array. Okay, because of course this find method here will return an array of all these documents and will also very nicely convert them into JavaScript objects. Okay, so this function here, this find method, really does all the work for us. Now, just like before, one more step before we can actually try this out, which is to wrap all of this here in the try block and then catch any potential errors. Now in this case, there are not going to be any validation errors like before, but let's still send an error here in this case, and let's just make it a 404. And it doesn't really matter so much at this point, because again, we are going to implement some better error handling here in the next, or in one of the next sections. All right, so let's just set it here to status fail, and the message to whatever error that we might get here. Okay, so let's test it out now. It's this one, get all tours, and yep, it works. So here we have the array of the 3 tours that we currently have in our database. Perfect. So next up, let's implement the getTour handler. So that's right, the next one that we have here. And let's get rid of this code and this code. All right. And this one is actually going to work in a very similar way. So I'm still doing this try catch here. So error like this, because we're still using async await in this one. So async, because now in order to find one tour, we are still going to be awaiting tour.find, but it's not going to be just find, but instead we're going to use find by ID. All right, so find by ID, but where is that ID actually coming from? Remember that? So let's actually take a look at the route. So going back here to Postman, this is how we call this endpoint. Or let's actually put a more real ID here already. So for example, this one from the park camper. And so our request might come from a route like this. And so here we have this ID parameter right in our route, right? So let's take a look at our router here. And so remember that this is how we specified the ID in the URL. So this ID is going to be part of the request, obviously. And so how do we actually get access to that ID here in this handler? Well, we do request.params.id. And it is ID because that's what we called this variable here, right? If it was name here, then here we had rec.params.name, right? Remember that? And now let's save that to tour. All right. Then let's get this code here back. Copy it here. And then also this one for the error block. And don't worry, I'm going to explain this function here in a second. I just want to finish this code here first. So this piece of code here is going to be exactly the same for this catch block. Give it a save now. And so we get no errors here from ESLint. Now about this find ID method here. Well, remember how up here we just used find. Okay, so find is to find all of the documents. And then we also have find one to find only one document. Okay, and so this find by ID is really just a shorthand, so a helper function for, let me write it here as a comment, for writing find one and then with the filter object, which is exactly like we learned in the MongoDB intro section. So we have the ID field, and then we could set that to rec.params.id. So this here would work the exact same way as this. Okay, so underscore ID, because that is what the ID looks like. So in MongoDB it's called underscore ID. And we could of course query for that field, right? We did exactly that in the last section. So we specified this filter object here, and then the property that we're searching for, and then the value that we want to search for. So exactly the same again as we did in the last section. And this find one method here will then only return one of the documents. Now this find by ID, as I mentioned before, is simply a shorthand for having to write this. So behind the scenes, it's going to do exactly this, but Mongoose simply wants to make our life easier and therefore gives us access to an easier method called find by ID, which simply expects the ID that we're looking for. All right, so let me actually leave that here just as a reference. And so now this should actually work already. So let's take a look at that. So we already put the ID of this tour. I think it was this park camper. So AC2 and AC2, that should be the park camper. And indeed it is. Great. And that is the easiest way of finding or of querying documents from the database. And there is a ton more that we can do with queries. And we're going to do all of that once we start implementing something like filtering or sorting or pagination and all that good stuff a bit later in this section. So in a couple of videos from now. At this point though, it's enough to simply return all of the documents here in this route handler, and then here simply the one for the matching ID. And that works now, and so let's move on to the next one.